Brenda Abdilla here, and welcome to Take Charge of Your Career, How to Feel and Actually Be More Powerful at Work. My name is Brenda Abdilla, and our little time together will be 22 minutes or less. I try to do it that way. I'm not a big fan of all of the sort of polling and engagement and raise your hand and all that happens in webinars. If I'm a participant, I'm happy to, do whatever the speaker wants. But if you want that kind of engagement from us, please let us know, because otherwise we've just decided our perfect model is about 20 or 22 minutes. We usually have some pretty good slides, so if you can get yourself some screen time, for the time being, we're not charging and we're not trying to sell you anything. It's just my form of thought leadership and just something that I feel is important enough to share. So if you are having any kind of technical difficulties, Laura, who is muted, and all of you are muted, by the way, you can message Laura on the message board. Nobody will see it, and she'll give you some advice, but otherwise I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So the idea for today's little webinar is just some observations that came from my female clients. If you don't know me, I know I have a lot of clients on the call today, but if you don't know me, I'm a career coach. I tend to work with high-level people mid-career who are either seated in a powerful leadership position but need more time management, more stress relief, more kind of leadership coaching, or somebody who is mid-career and seriously considering a change, and that can obviously be a very, very scary thing. So today's webinar is specifically about women, but half of my clients are men. There are just a few little quirky things I noticed, and I decided it would be a good topic to share. So the data is in. I don't know if you saw the research that came out that when women are involved in the top at companies in 91 different countries, this was a study based on 22,000 publicly traded companies, and the study was done by Peterson Institute of International Economics. They found that those companies can count on a 15% rise in profit by having women at the top. And the idea is not to make women like men. I think this data speaks to the fact that women are coming into their own more than ever, and it's not because they're behaving like men, it's because they're behaving like themselves, and their strengths and their leadership is much more authentic. And so there will be no aspect of today's discussion that is going to encourage you to be more like a man. Men, although we wouldn't put them all in the same bucket, we all have our own kind of leadership and strategy. But there are just a couple things that might be of use. So if you feel like there's a lot of confusion about females and leadership and that we haven't quite really broken through the glass ceiling yet, you're not imagining it. A Pew Research Center survey indicated that people see women as being equally qualified to in political leadership and corporate leadership, yet 4 in 10 say that women have to do more to prove themselves than their male counterparts. So that sort of, two sides of a coin kind of thing is real and alive. We are making major progress, but there's still a lot of confusion. So I really wanted to mention that, because if it feels like we're not quite there yet, you're not imagining it, and it's not really your fault. It's just something that is part of progress. So the things that we're going to talk about today are what I find to be unconscious mistakes. They're subtle things, and a lot of the work I do is really, not about the big breakthrough thought. It is about a subtle shift or a subtle change in behavior or the way that you think that can have an impact on your career. And my belief is that our career has a huge impact on our lives. I simply choose to do my coaching and my leadership work through the lens of career. But really, this material can impact any aspect of your life. So I just want to give a shout out to Sheryl Sandberg, because she is, to me, the ultimate career coach for women, even though that's not what she does for a living. She's over at Facebook running things. But her book, Lean In, has some amazing information. It has a ton of data, and I absolutely recommend it to everyone. So don't stop and order it now. That's not good productivity. Just write it down, or you'll get a copy of this webinar and you can order it later. What I find is that many people own it but haven't read it, and that you're really missing out, because there is a massive amount of research went into writing that book, and it's an amazing handbook for women and career at any level. So the 3 unconscious mistakes that we're going to cover today are being overly passive or overly aggressive, not remembering that you have leverage, and letting your quirky high standards get in the way of your success. So we're going to break down those 3. So the first one is using overly passive or overly aggressive behavior. So passive, if you look at this sort of linear line, passive is allowing what happens without active response. So that's sad. Passivity is really sad, I think. And then the other side of the spectrum is aggressive. And that's when you attack or confront, and we're talking about communication here. Your communication is aggressive, or people feel attacked by you. So either of these 2 extremes are what I find to be a mistake in both feeling and being powerful. And being in the extreme is kind of habitual. How we are on this line, I find with my clients, is just habitual behavior that we're not really aware of. And so the reason I bring up this mistake is to just make us more aware. So if you notice on this new slide, I crossed out the word passive. So we no longer have passive, we have passive-aggressive, because there is no such thing as passive. No one is passive in all realms. If you're talking about behavior and communication, people who are extreme tend to be passive-aggressive or aggressive-aggressive. So passive-aggressive is indirect expression, defined as indirect expression of hostility or aggression. So I like to give the example of passive-aggressive is, the administrative assistant who said, "Oh yeah, the VP called and wanted you to come to his office. Should I have given you that message?" Passive-aggressive behavior. On the other side is combative or aggressive behavior. And so I want you to think to yourself, what is your default setting when there's conflict, or you're uncomfortable, or there is distrust, or just something that is not really that good? Do you behave passive-aggressively, or do you tend to behave aggressive-aggressive? When I was in my 20s, which was a long time ago, I was really aggressive-aggressive. I was a young manager. I had a large team, and I was very insecure, and I dealt with conflict very head on. And I think I kind of wanted people to be intimidated by me. I think I was trying to act like a guy. Anyway, I've learned, hopefully you'll learn, but that overly passive-aggressive or aggressive-aggressive behavior. So the next slide is going to show us what we're looking for. Right smack in the middle between passive aggression and aggressive aggression is assertive behavior. So assertive is when you can have a brave conversation. An assertive woman or an assertive person is the most powerful, because it doesn't mean that you shy away from conflict, and it doesn't mean that you attack, but you're able to say what needs to be said without being forceful or overly passive. You can still be direct. You can, deal with what needs to be dealt with, even though you're uncomfortable. That is the pinnacle of assertive behavior. So I call this, the antidote to being overly passive or overly aggressive is finding your voice. So where in your life and work do you need to find your voice? And this needs to be an authentic version of yourself. But what does assertiveness look like in a professional setting? Well, it's certainly not this gal with the megaphone. She's being aggressive, but the gal sitting at the computer in this picture is being passive. And so where is that balance for you, and where do you tend to fall on that line in your default behavior? So I usually have my clients sort of plot themselves along the line, and we come up with different scenarios and to kind of make a deal to try to find their voice, try to find a place where they're already quite assertive. So for example, many of us find that we can be assertive with our children's caregivers because we're the mom. I mean, we're the only one that, you know, if the mom isn't going to stick up for the kid, who is? And so if that's an area where you are able to be assertive, but maybe you're not able to be assertive in other areas, or you get too aggressive, you get easily triggered. So I'm going to wrap up this one by just saying, give it some thought, and think about where you could be a little more assertive and where you tend to fall on that line. Mistake number 2 that we make is forgetting that we have leverage. And this is a distinct difference in the gender. Men tend to think about their leverage, and they're much more conscious of what their leverage is in work situations and at home, but especially at work. And women tend to not think of this at all. Our confidence takes a little hit, and then we forget that we have leverage. So one of the reasons I wrote my book, which is pictured here, What's Your Lane, is that I found when women became moms, they really forgot that they have leverage. And several of the chapters deal with domestic division of labor, and throughout the entire book, I remind moms that they have more leverage than they think in their own homes. So I'm going to give you some examples about leverage, and then I want you to think about your leverage. One of the things I think that keeps us from really pondering our leverage is that we dislike people that use their leverage against us, and we dislike the thought of having leverage used against us. And so I don't want you to think about leverage in terms of that you're going to use it or exploit it. It's the knowing you have it that changes your whole thought process. It impacts your behaviors. It impacts your attitude. So for example, your experience, a certain skill set, a certain influence that you have, absolutely those are leverage. So I want you to think of a couple right now, but then this week, I want you to come up with at least 10. And once you start that list, it can really be a powerful exercise. So, you know, I mentioned here gender, age, and skin color, and that's such a politically incorrect thing to say, but it can be leverage. What would be politically incorrect is using it as leverage. For example, I have a client who is in the tech industry, and she's a very high-level salesperson, and she is in a man's industry. Now, this used to be something that, you know, caused us great harm in our gender, but she walks in on a sales call, and they've had 4 men present to them that morning, and she's the female. She's something different. Now, she doesn't have to wear a low-cut blouse and a short skirt. That would be exploiting her leverage and her gender. That's not what I'm talking about. But she realizes that she's somewhat of a breath of fresh air, and that she will get a little bit more attention to her product because she's something different. That's leverage. So I really want you to start thinking about what your leverage is. Oftentimes when we get into a work situation that is stressful, or like I said, we feel our confidence has been hit, this is the first thing to go. We forget that we have a skill set, that we're the only person in the department who knows how to do X. And that, even if you don't end up using it, because once you use that leverage, well, then you can't use it again. It's a powerful weapon, but you can't use it over and over. But you can perhaps leverage your skills to go elsewhere, or you can subtly remember what your leverage is and be better at bragging about yourself or tooting your own horn in your next review. So leverage is a really important thing, and forgetting that we have it is something that can is not doing us justice. So knowing your leverage builds your confidence, it helps you take more risks, and it reminds you of your power. And power, really, for the purpose of today's call, power is much more about mindset than the typical kind of wielding power, the Hollywood TV power, that we see in, nighttime soap operas and Game of Thrones. This is about internal power. It's that internal force that you feel makes all the difference in the world. Okay, my favorite mistake is number 3, and that is hiding behind our quirky standards. So this is something that women tend to specialize in. I call it irrational rationalization. And we all do it. I do it myself. I catch myself doing it all the time. But it's when we kind of hide behind our quirky standards. I'm going to give you some examples. And it's a form of self-sabotage. It absolutely is. So these are literal quotes that my clients have given me about in an effort to avoid sort of moving themselves forward. I had a client say, I don't apply to big companies, even though she was a really, Ivy League educated, powerful woman. I don't apply to big companies because I don't like recruiters. That's a quirky standard that's keeping her from moving forward, and it's not rational. I've had a client say, yes, my skill set is perfect for startups, but all the people at startups are young. So I don't want to work at a startup. Yes, I would love to be on that super hot, visible team right now, but he makes everyone present during meetings, and I don't like speaking in front of others. So you're starting to get the idea of these sort of quirky standards that we hide behind. Sometimes it's called perfectionism, sometimes it's just a very high standard, but it doesn't really make sense because it's just self-sabotage. Some women might say, well, I'm going to have a family in 5 years, so the travel isn't going to work. Sheryl Sandberg talks a lot about that in her book, about leaning out before you lean in. If I ask for a raise, that will put me on the radar, and I don't want to be on the radar. So this is something that I really want you to think about. It's called a million different things. I call it quirky standard. Amazing life balance author Mary Laverty, who wrote I Used to Have a Handle on Life, but It Broke, and a number of other fabulous books. She calls it filling in the blanks. So here's an excerpt from Mary's book. When we don't have all the facts, we feel out of control. It's hard to make a logical decision with incomplete data. This absence of detailed information creates anxiety. What do we do to gain back our sense of control? We make stuff up and fill in the blanks. We see a small part of what's going on and we rush to judgment. We rationalize that our added information is obvious, it's common sense, or it's the most likely explanation. Most of us do this so often and efficiently that we don't even realize it's our feeble attempt to control the unknown. Absolutely. Even this webinar, for example, is a good example of me being freaked out about perfection and not wanting to do sort of the latest, greatest technology. Laura, who is the behind the scenes person, has been bugging me about doing webinars for years. And what I would tell her is that my clientele doesn't do webinars, or they're too busy, or I don't want to be part of the noise. But really, I was just terrified about the prospect of speaking out into blank space, which is exactly how a webinar is if you've never conducted one. And I'm so glad that I overcame that. Okay, so where's my little slide? I'm missing a slide, sorry. Okay, so I am missing a slide on your screen, but there it is. Sorry, technical difficulty, which is exactly why I was afraid to run a webinar, but it all turned out okay. Okay, so what I want you to think about is, where are you having this quirky high standard and keeping yourself from something really big and really possible? Okay, so as we wrap up, I want you to just consider what your take-home ideas are. The assertive and a passive-aggressive behavior discussion. Is that something that you want to look at for yourself? Or are you pretty good in that area? Remembering that you have leverage. I hope you'll do the assignment and write down at least 10 areas that you have leverage in your life and in your work. And then taking risks. Where do you want to take some risks instead of hiding behind your quirky standards? So as always with my clients, I want you to focus on your strengths. This is not about fixing you. You're not broken. This is not about working on your weaknesses or shoring them up. It's really about focusing on your strengths and seeing where a few tweaks could make a really huge difference in your life and work. So as part of your attendance, you will get a free download of my book, my ebook, Stress Less for Better Success. And that has a ton of super cool stress exercises in it. It actually has 3 stress exercises in it. And I look forward to our next webinar, which will be on the topic of how to say no. And that'll be sometime in September. I don't think we've picked a date yet, but I'm glad you're signed up for my newsletter so we can stay connected. And I hope this was useful to you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today, and I appreciate everyone who signed up. Thank you.